I'm joined now by a man who's seen perhaps more EASD conferences than virtually anyone. His name is Andrew Boulton. He'll be very familiar to many of you. He's spent more than 20 years with EASD and been president, of course, for 4. And now you're the incoming president of the International Diabetes Federation. So you're a sucker for punishment.
One could agree with that, yes.
But your particular interest is neuropathy. So you've chaired a session on that. I know it's a personal crusade of yours. Tell me about that particular session and what's come out of it.
Well, we had some very interesting presentations looking at the involvement, for example, of the central nervous system in diabetic neuropathy, and also some large prevalence and epidemiological studies just showing how common neuropathy is across not only Europe but across the world.
And it's enormously expensive to treat. It's terribly debilitating for the patient. And yet it doesn't seem to be, I'm going to use the word, quite as sexy as some of the other areas in diabetes. Why is that?
I think that's a fair comment. I remember once speaking at the New Zealand Diabetes Association to a group of primary care doctors. And their comment was, eyes are great, kidneys are great, but I can't be enthused by feet. But if we took one step forward by removing the shoes and socks and examining the feet of every time you see a patient with diabetes, that would have a huge impact on reducing complications of the foot due to nerve damage or arterial disease. And it's the complications of diabetes that drive the cost.
So what did your session come up with? Are there ways of, apart from just people taking their socks off, that are going to help us deal with this problem?
I think there's a symposium coming up in half an hour that I'm chairing on diabetes in primary care. And I think it's extremely important to involve the primary care physicians in diabetes, because diabetes is one of the commonest problems that they see in primary care. And we have to remember that 80 to 90% of all diabetic patients, not only in Western countries, but also in developing countries, are looked after by those in primary care. So for the last 3 years, we've had a symposium on diabetes in primary care, which has been well attended, and I'm pleased to say this year it's in the largest hall, and I know the 2 speakers, so I think the audience will be in for a treat of the importance of primary care in looking after people with diabetes. And that includes the foot, the eyes, the kidneys, blood pressure, all the complications that we don't need expensive equipment to screen for.
Now, give me a little flavour of, you've been associated with the EASD for all this time, of what you've seen happen in those years and where you see us going.
I think that there has been a huge progress in involvement of the patient and the primary care physician and the team approach to diabetes care, involving not only the physicians, the specialist nurses are extremely important. I rely on them entirely. They're a member of the team. The podiatrist and all the paramedical associated healthcare professionals that really are very important in the team. We've seen the interest in diabetes increase along with the increased prevalence. For example, at the first EASD meeting I went to, I think it was in 1980, and there were probably less than 1,000 there. This year we've probably got about 15,000 people here. So there's been a huge increase in diabetes and its complications, in clinical research, in basic research, and translational research. And I think this has been the biggest development over the last 20, 30, 40 years even.
And do you think we understand diabetes better? Are we really translating the knowledge into better treatments for patients?
I think we have a long way to go, but we have taken steps. I think we understand better the pathophysiology of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes and the evolution of complications. And large studies such as the DCCT in the United States have shown us the importance of good control in the primary prevention of late complications of diabetes, and the UK PDS has shown similar results in type 2 diabetes. So we have made progress, but it's the first few steps on a long hill to climb.
You mentioned prevention there, but we're not very good at primary prevention yet. And EASD can be a leader in persuading health systems globally to try and get involved in primary prevention.
Yeah, I think primary prevention, of course, is the answer for the future. I was fortunate enough to share the stage a couple of years ago with Sri Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. And there they've got a huge epidemic. They've probably got some of the highest prevalence figures in the world for diabetes. And he got up and he said the biggest threat to the survival of our nation's health is no longer infectious diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, AIDS, it's diabetes. And he's absolutely right. So I think if we can get our politicians involved, as in India, which is probably the most important country that needs to be involved in diabetes, then we're going to make a lot of progress. And of course, in the UK, I know politicians with both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And to get those on board as ambassadors and also well-known personnel in sports and people actors and so on, I think getting all these people together to raise the profile of diabetes as a serious condition that can be prevented by screening high-risk individuals. So in terms of screening, of course, you can't screen the whole population, but those with a strong family history of diabetes, there's a history of gestational diabetes, those from certain ethnic groups that are more at risk, and those who are significantly obese. So these are the kind of people which would target for screening.
So we've seen actually a great improvement. I mean, you say there's a long way to go, but actually the progress that's been made through these 20 years of EASD meetings is remarkable.
If I look back at my first diabetic clinic, which was in 1977, we did a random blood sugar and say 5 millimoles, 90 milligrams, excellent. See you in 6 months. And we did a urine test. We did everything we could do to stop urine sugar being lost in the urine. So the tablets and the insulin were given, and patients looked at their own urine, like a little biochemistry test, and if it was negative for urine, that was good. That's all we did. And now we know we've got continuous glucose monitoring, we've got home blood sugar monitoring, we've got glycated hemoglobin. There have been huge strides forward. But it's entertaining. In the front of one textbook of medicine from Harvard, it says half of what we teach our medical students is wrong. The trouble is we don't know which half. So I was taught as a medical student in the 1970s, whatever you've got to do everything to stop glycosuria. And now we're giving tablets like the gliflozins that cause glycosuria. Absolutely the opposite to what I was taught. So we need to be critical of everything we hear.
Yes, and we were all taught about insulin resistance being the primary thing.
Yeah, and now it's small beta cell dysfunction.
Now it's small beta cells.
As we heard from Steve Kahn.
Yes, Steve Kahn, magnificent. So
Absolutely,
if you didn't catch Steve Kahn's
He's difficult
lecture,
to catch.
But if you didn't catch Steve Kahn's lecture, I absolutely commend it to you. It's up there on the EASD website. Do look at it, it's wonderful.
It's a true example of how a Claude Bernard lecture should be delivered.
Yeah, and fantastic. And thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time. I know how busy you were at these meetings. You're much in demand. Much appreciate you coming. Thank you.